Ah, yes, the classic question that has haunted the fandom for decades and sparked 1,001 different memes. But the answer to why the Eagles didn't just fly the ring to Mordor reveals the true terrifying depth of Tolkien's world. If you've ever been down a Lord of the Rings rabbit hole or over to any of the Reddits or subreddits, then you've definitely seen the Eagle argument. It's the ultimate gotcha for people who think that they've spotted a massive hole in the plot. Now, the logic does seem simple enough on paper. Why spend 3 movies walking across a freaking continent when you could just hitch a ride on an eagle and just drop the ring into the lava like, I don't know, Amazon's first delivery driver? Now, if it was actually that easy, somebody like Elrond probably would have brought it up and done it. I mean, think about it. The guy has lived through 3 ages of brutal warfare and literal world-ending catastrophes. He's not going to overlook a gigantic winged shortcut. The reality is, it's not a plot hole at all. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how Middle-earth actually functions. We're not looking at a world governed by modern military logic where you just send in the Air Force to bypass the infantry. We're looking at a world governed by ancient, semi-divine rules and a very specific kind of power balance. To treat the Eagles like some kind of Middle-earth Uber service is to ignore who they actually are, and more importantly, the terrifying logistical nightmare that Mordor's airspace actually represented during the War of the Ring. Before we look at the defenses of Mordor, we've got to understand that these birds weren't anybody's pets to begin with. To understand why the Eagles didn't just play taxi, you've got to realize that they aren't just big birds. In the Legendarium, they are the messengers and spies of Manwë, the king of the Valar. Effectively, they're minor demigods, ancient spirits in avian form who answer to a higher power than any king of Gondor or even Gandalf himself. They've got their own culture, their own language, and a massive amount of pride. They aren't a branch of the Free People's military. They're an independent faction with their own interests and a very strict hands-off policy regarding the affairs of mortals. Now, this is why Gandalf, even with all of his power and his standing as a Maiar himself, has to ask for favors rather than just giving orders. He's got a personal friendship with Gwaihir, the Wind Lord, but that doesn't mean he can command an entire species to fly into a suicide mission. The Eagles aren't interested in being the foot soldiers of men. They intervene only when the cosmic balance is at stake, and usually only at the direct or indirect prompting of the Valar. Asking them to carry the ring, an object of pure corrupting malice, is a massive ask for a creature that's already high-ranking in the spiritual hierarchy. They knew that if they got too close to that kind of power, they could become something far worse than a simple bird of prey. Now here's the thing. Even if the Eagles did agree to the mission, they would still have to face the most sophisticated anti-air defense system in the history of Middle-earth. The entire strategy of the Fellowship was built on one single desperate hope: secrecy. Sauron's greatest weakness was his own arrogance. He couldn't conceive of anybody wanting to destroy the ring rather than use it. That's why 2 hobbits could slip into Mordor. Now compare that to a fleet of giant eagles. You might as well fly into Mordor with a neon sign and a big brass band. The moment those wings crossed the mountains of Efelduath, every eye in the Dark Lord's service would be locked onto him. Sauron didn't just have orcs. He had a literal eye that acted as a spiritual radar capable of piercing through shadows and cloud. So, if the Eagles tried to fly in, they'd be met with the Nazgul on their fell beasts, flying terrors specifically bred to dominate the skies. Beyond that, the logistical reality of Mordor included thousands of orc archers and massive siege engines. An eagle is a pretty large target, and once grounded, the mission's over. You can't exactly do a stealth drop from 10,000 feet. So trying to fly the ring in would have been the fastest way to hand the ring back to Sauron on a silver or feathered platter. And the reality is, the physical danger was only half of the battle, as the true reason for their absence lies in the debt between a wizard and a king. We often talk about Gwaihir and Gandalf like they're best friends, but in the books, their relationship is more of a mutual respect built on a very specific debt. See, years prior, Gandalf had healed him from a poisoned arrow wound, and the Wind Lord essentially promised to pay him back. But there's a massive difference between a "hey bro, you owe me" and a suicide pact. The Wind Lord has carried Gandalf exactly 3 times. Once from the top of Orthanc, once from the peak of Celebadil after the Balrog fight, and finally to rescue Frodo and Sam. Every single one of those instances was a rescue mission, not a tactical deployment. When Gandalf asks him to fly him away from Saruman, the Eagle's response is telling. He says he can carry the wizard, but not unto the ends of the earth. The dude's got limits. The Eagles aren't interested in flying into a volcanic war zone just because some humans and elves lost their magical ring. They've got their own young to protect, they've got their own borders to watch. And to the Eagles, the War of the Ring was a terrestrial conflict that they only engaged in when the stakes became cosmic. They weren't about to risk the extinction of their species for a plan that relied on them being the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card for a wizard who was already pushing his luck and his limit. So, beyond the internal politics of the birds, Tolkien himself also had a very specific reason for keeping the sky empty until the very end. So, if you want to know the real reason why the Eagle stayed home, you've got to look at Tolkien's own letters. He was famously protective of the Eagles, calling them a dangerous machine in terms of narrative structure. He knew that if you use a powerful supernatural force to solve every single problem, the stakes of the story instantly evaporate. So, from a literary perspective, the Eagles are the definition of a deus ex machina, a god from the machine that drops in to save the day when all hope is lost. Tolkien used them sparingly because he knew that overusing them would turn the journey into a total farce. But there's a deeper philosophical reason here too. The Third Age was the Age of Men. It was the era where the old powers, the elves, the wizards, and the direct interventions of the Valar were supposed to step back and let the inhabitants of Middle-earth decide their own fate. If a gigantic flying chicken sent by a god flies the ring to the sun, then Frodo's choice, Sam's loyalty, and Aragorn's leadership, they don't mean a single thing. The quest had to be won by the smallest, most insignificant creatures using their own 2 feet. It had to be a test of character, not some display of aerial superiority from the heavens. Which brings us to the moment when the Eagles finally did appear, proving that their timing was as intentional as their previous absence. The only reason the rescue at the end works, the iconic scene where the Eagles swoop in to pull Frodo and Sam off the crumbling slopes of Mount Doom, is because the ring was already gone. Without the ring, Sauron's radar was dead, the Nazgul were distracted or destroyed, and the spiritual no-fly zone over Mordor had finally collapsed. Even with the skies clear and the ring gone, the world was left wondering if the era of magic was truly over, or if it was just beginning. I don't know, maybe I'm rambling, but what do you think? Did the Eagle's absence make the victory of the small more meaningful, or does the logic of a flying shortcut still keep you up at night?